There is a hidden mechanism inside every mind, a quiet machinery most never notice, yet it governs their reactions more faithfully than logic ever could. It is the instinct that rises the moment a command appears, the ancient impulse that makes a man protect his pride before he protects his interest. Tell someone what to do, and you awaken their rebellion. Suggest nothing, and you awaken their blindness. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. He saw that people do not defend truth. They defend the illusion of autonomy. The moment someone feels guided, they resist. The moment they believe they guide themselves, they surrender effortlessly. And so begins the silent architecture of reverse influence, a strategy not of war, but of atmosphere, not of force, but of presence. Picture a path that curves gently toward your intention, so subtly that the traveler believes he chose the direction. You do not drag him. You arrange the scenery. You do not argue. You shape the frame of what seems natural. Influence becomes a form of gravity, not a push, but a pull. The genius lies not in what you declare, but in what you allow another to imagine. Once a thought feels self-born, it becomes unshakable. Once a choice feels personal, it becomes sacred. And so the strategist studies not how to command people, but how to awaken the sense of independence that makes them predictable. You whisper uncertainty, and they chase certainty. You offer distance, and they chase closeness. You avoid insistence, and they insist for you. This is the hidden pulse of human pride. It governs nations, friendships, negotiations, even love. Reverse psychology is not trickery. It is the redirection of instinct. The mind most resists what threatens its ego, and most embraces what flatters it. The true manipulator never breaks the ego. He feeds it carefully, guiding it like fire, warming the hand while consuming the wood beneath. Freedom, or the illusion of it, becomes the leash no one ever questions. And in that leash, you find control without appearing to hold it. Every influence that survives the test of time begins with a single understanding. People are far easier to guide when they believe they are unobserved. The moment you shine a light on your intention, they step back to protect themselves. But when you dim your presence, when you let them feel the comfort of their own conclusions, they open the gates willingly. That is why the strategist never begins with instruction. He begins with invitation. A gentle doubt, a subtle possibility, a question left floating like a seed in the wind. Humans cannot resist completing an unfinished thought. They cannot endure ambiguity. The urge to resolve, to prove, to feel intelligent pushes them exactly where you want them to go. Machiavelli knew that certainty is a chain, and the one who provides it becomes a master. Yet the paradox remains. Offer it too directly, and it becomes manipulation. Offer it indirectly, and it becomes revelation. This is why reverse guidance thrives on the half-suggestion, the incomplete observation, the soft remark that leaves the mind curious rather than defensive. You do not say, "This is the truth." You say, "Perhaps there is more to see," and suddenly every mind begins building the truth that serves your design. Influence grows strongest when it grows inside someone else's pride. Your role is not to force their perception, but to rearrange the landscape where their perception forms. People do not simply act, they justify. They do not merely choose. They defend their choices as if they reveal their identity. Once they choose a path you authored, they will guard it as if it came from within. That is the secret most fail to grasp. Guiding behavior is not about mastering others, but mastering the conditions that shape their illusions. The strategist moves like a shadow, never loud, never forceful, letting others spill their fears, hopes, and insecurities into the silence. In that openness, direction becomes effortless. To influence a person openly is to challenge their ego. To influence them silently is to own it. And the one who owns the ego owns the mind that serves it. There is a moment in every subtle manipulation when the target begins to believe that the idea forming in their mind is entirely theirs. And this moment is the true birthplace of control. What most people never realize is that influence rarely arrives through confrontation. It arrives through alignment. You create a gentle rhythm in the environment, a tonal shift in the emotional landscape, and let their instincts follow the current you designed. Humans do not track the origin of their thoughts. They track the comfort those thoughts provide. Give them a perspective that flatters their intelligence, and they will cling to it even against evidence. Present a path that strokes their pride, and they will walk it with conviction. This is why the strategist never appears eager, never appears invested. Eagerness awakens suspicion. Indifference awakens desire. When someone senses you are detached, their mind bends toward you to restore equilibrium. They chase your approval not because you demanded it, but because you withheld it. That withholding becomes a gravitational force, drawing them deeper into your orbit without a single command spoken. In the realm of reverse psychology, pride is the axis around which every decision turns. Tell a person you admire their restraint, and they will restrain themselves to protect the image. Tell them you trust their logic, and they will ignore emotion to prove you right. The human mind is a performer, constantly acting to satisfy the audience it imagines. Your task is not to argue with their reasoning, but to decorate their stage. The more you subtly define the traits they believe they possess, the more they adapt their behavior to match your script. The ego does not seek truth, it seeks confirmation. And when you offer that confirmation in disguise, you rule them without visibility. The powerful man is not the one who shouts his influence, but the one whose silence others interpret as depth. Once they begin imagining your thoughts, you no longer need to guide them. Their pride will guide them for you, defending decisions you engineered and protecting beliefs you planted like seeds in an unsuspecting garden. There is a unique power in the suggestion that contradicts expectation, for the mind is wired to recoil from pressure, yet magnetized toward challenge. When you tell someone not to do something, their ego awakens with the fire of defiance. When you tell them they might not understand, they burn to prove that they do. The strategist uses this instinct as a sculptor uses clay, shaping decisions not through force, but through the hunger pride creates. Reverse psychology thrives where resistance is expected. It thrives even more where resistance becomes self-inflicted. You do not forbid directly. You wrap your intention in the velvet of subtle provocation. Whisper that a choice is too bold, too complex, too risky for most, and their ego will drag them toward it with the fury of self-validation. Humans crave the feeling of autonomy so fiercely that they will sabotage their own comfort to defend the illusion of freedom. In this tension between what is suggested and what is desired, the invisible strategist designs the path. A gentle nudge toward reluctance creates momentum toward action. A quiet doubt planted like a seed blossoms into certainty they believe they cultivated. Pride becomes both the leash and the engine, pulling them forward while convincing them they walk entirely of their own will. This is why the master of influence never relies on direct persuasion. Persuasion threatens identity. Instead, he constructs a mirror that reflects the version of self the other person longs to embody. Tell a cautious man he is known for bold insight, and he will make a daring choice to protect the compliment. Tell a volatile mind that you admire their calm judgment, and watch as they swallow their chaos to maintain that perception. People act not according to who they are, but according to who they wish to be seen as. By defining their ideal self subtly, indirectly, almost accidentally, you tether their behavior to your silent design. And the beauty of this method lies in its invisibility. When people feel they are acting in alignment with their own nature, they do not question the origin of their motivations. They simply act. They simply justify. They simply follow the invisible trail you scattered like breadcrumbs in the dark. Influence becomes effortless not because you impose, but because you withdraw, allowing their vanity to complete the architecture you drafted. In this quiet dance, you discover the deepest truth. The most obedient servant is the one who believes he commands himself. Indifference is the rare force that bends even the strongest personalities, for human beings are addicted to emotional equilibrium. When someone shows anger, we respond with caution. When someone shows interest, we respond with openness. But when someone shows nothing, no urgency, no desire, no reaction, the mind spirals into a frantic search for meaning. This is why the strategist cultivates calm detachment, not as a shield, but as a beacon. The absence of emotion becomes an invitation for others to project their own. They chase answers you never promised, clarity you never offered, validation you never guaranteed. And the more you withdraw, the more they crave the stability they imagine you possess. Machiavelli understood that silence is not emptiness. It is a mirror. In it, people confront their insecurity, their need for approval, their fear of being insignificant. They attempt to fill the silence by seeking your attention, offering information, negotiating against themselves. Indifference disarms because it forces others to reveal the emotional landscape you will later navigate with precision. It is not rejection. It is strategic scarcity. People desire what feels rare, and nothing is rarer than someone who cannot be provoked. This is also the soil in which the reverse threat grows strongest. Instead of warning someone of consequences, you offer them freedom. Instead of showing fear of loss, you show that loss means nothing to you. Humans expect tension. They prepare for confrontation, but serenity confuses them. When you say, "Do as you believe is best," you force them into a confrontation with themselves, not with you. They replay their intentions, questioning whether their choice appears wise or impulsive, fair or cruel. In the vacuum of your calm, they invent punishments harsher than anything you could have spoken. Their imagination becomes your soldier, fighting on your behalf. Reverse psychology weaponizes expectation by denying it. They wanted your anger. Instead, you gave them peace. They wanted your fear. Instead, you gave them indifference. In that dissonance, their confidence fractures. And as they search for the emotional reaction they cannot find, they drift toward your influence, hoping to restore a balance that never truly existed. Once you master this paradox, guiding by stepping back, controlling by releasing, you hold a form of power immune to detection, for it hides in the hollow spaces of human insecurity. There comes a point in manipulation where words become unnecessary and rhythm becomes everything. People do not bond through agreement, but through synchronization. When two emotional frequencies match, trust appears instantly, even without logic. This is why the strategist mirrors emotion, not opinion. If they raise their voice, you soften yours. If they hesitate, you pause. If they express doubt, you nod in quiet recognition. You are not validating the content, you are validating the feeling. And feelings, not arguments, build allegiance. A person begins to sense that you understand them more deeply than others ever have, unaware that you are merely reflecting their internal state back at them. This is the mirror trap. It is not domination. It is resonance. Once they believe you feel as they feel, they become guided not by your commands, but by their own comfort in your presence. The human mind is drawn to similarity. It lowers its guard, loosens its defenses, reveals its vulnerabilities. And in that space of disarmed authenticity, you gain access to motives and desires they hide, even from themselves. They begin to confide, to trust, to follow not because you insist, but because you seem to vibrate at the frequency of their soul. What they do not see is that the reflection belongs to them, not to you. They mistake your calculated empathy for kinship. They mistake your silence for understanding. In that illusion, influence becomes total. But the strategist does not stop at resonance. He progresses to identity itself. Every person carries an idealized version of who they wish they were: rational, strong, perceptive, disciplined. They defend that image more fiercely than truth, more fiercely than comfort, more fiercely than logic. This is the self-image hook, the sharpest blade of reverse psychology. You do not order behavior. You imply it matches the identity they pride themselves on. Tell someone, "You're usually thoughtful about these things," and you push them to reconsider an impulsive decision without ever confronting them. Tell someone, "You're too intelligent to let emotion cloud this," and you steer them toward rationality without revealing your hand. People do not obey you. They obey the reflection you present to them. They align their actions with the portrait you subtly describe. And the elegance of this tactic is that it bypasses resistance entirely. No one rebels against their own identity. They only rebel against commands that threaten it. Influence becomes effortless the moment you stop guiding decisions and start guiding self-perception. For a man will betray others. He will betray logic, but he will not betray the image of himself he believes the world sees. To control that image is to control every thought built upon it. Doubt is the smallest spark with the longest shadow, for once it enters the mind, it expands in every direction, feeding on insecurity and imagination. This is why the strategist does not confront certainty, he fractures it. A single question, delivered without pressure, can unravel an entire belief. "Are you sure that's how it happened?" Or, "That's interesting. I've heard something different." These phrases do not attack. They erode. They do not provoke defense. They provoke introspection. Certainty becomes uncomfortable, even suspicious. And in this discomfort, the ego begins arguing with itself, searching for stability in a maze it cannot escape. People detest ambiguity because ambiguity exposes vulnerability. They crave a return to confidence, and the easiest path back is the perspective you quietly offer later. But the brilliance lies in timing. You do not impose your view immediately. You let doubt do its silent work. Doubt makes people question their memory, their judgment, even their identity. It makes them receptive, softened, more willing to consider alternatives that preserve their pride. And since your suggestion arrives as a solution rather than a challenge, they embrace it as clarity they discovered, not doctrine you imposed. In this way, you never win the argument. You simply let their certainty collapse under its own weight. And once the mind seeks refuge, it always returns to the architect of its doubt. Yet perhaps the most elegant maneuver is the strategic loss, the deliberate surrender that blinds pride with triumph. When you retreat at the right moment, others feel victorious and become careless. They reveal their intentions more freely, expose their reasoning more openly, and underestimate your capability entirely. Agree with an adversary too quickly, and they assume superiority. Their guard falls like a curtain. Their ego swells, and in that swelling, their strategy becomes transparent. This is the false surrender. You appear flexible, accommodating, even submissive, all while observing with clarity sharper than conflict could ever grant. Once they believe they have defeated you, they no longer defend themselves. They speak too much, decide too quickly, trust too easily. And when someone feels superior to you, they unconsciously seek your validation, craving the sweetness of victory again. That craving becomes your leash. You let them win small battles so you can claim the war. In their triumph, they stop calculating. In your silence, you begin shaping. And when the time arrives to strike, not with aggression, but with precision, they discover too late that every step they took was into the trap their pride built for you. The strategist's greatest victories are born not from confrontation, but from the illusions he allows others to celebrate. Contrast is the architect of perception. The mind does not judge something by its essence, but by the shadows cast around it. To make one option appear wise, you simply place it beside a foolish one. To make your path seem safe, you exaggerate the danger of the alternatives. This principle governs politics, leadership, relationships, and even personal identity. People do not choose what is best. They choose what feels less threatening. Machiavelli observed that fear is more persuasive than reason and more lasting than admiration. So the strategist frames choices not as equals, but as opposites, one path serene, the other storm-torn. The target believes they are acting logically, yet every conclusion arises from the environment you crafted. Contrast does not force, it guides. It does not persuade, it redefines. When you describe a person, idea, or direction with subtle adjectives, you sculpt emotional associations that feel organic to the listener. A simple phrase such as, "It might be risky, but perhaps you know best," plants a contrast between fear and pride. The ego, hungry for affirmation, moves instinctively toward the path that preserves its image. In this subtle war of framing, you win without debate. You shift the borders of perception until your desired outcome becomes the only outcome that feels intelligent. And the beauty of this technique is that it does not require lies-only arrangement. Reality stays the same, but the context changes everything. Yet few tools carry the weight of silence, for silence is the crucible in which the mind smelts its deepest fears and desires. Words scatter influence like light. Silence condenses it into fire. When you pause before responding, others project meanings that betray their insecurities. When you refrain from explaining yourself, they examine their own motives instead of questioning yours. Silence is not emptiness, it is psychological gravity. The more you withhold, the more they imagine. And imagination is far more powerful than speech. People fear what they cannot measure, admire what they cannot decipher, and respect what they cannot predict. This is why the strategist uses silence as others use armies. A well-timed pause can unsettle 1,000 arguments. A withheld reaction can expose truths no interrogation could obtain. When someone attempts to provoke, dominate, or manipulate you, your lack of response becomes a mirror reflecting their desperation. They show their true nature while you remain untouchable. Silence forces others to confront themselves in the absence of your guidance. They bend, adjust, and adapt not to your commands, but to the emotional resonance your stillness creates. And in that resonance, you become the axis around which their behavior orbits. To speak is to risk misinterpretation. To remain silent is to become indispensable. The strategist knows that silence doesn't weaken influence, it concentrates it. Power begins to multiply the moment others start needing you more than you need them. This is the reversal of need, the silent pivot on which authority turns without ever announcing itself. The strategist never chases validation. Craving exposes weakness. Instead, he makes his presence subtly valuable, useful, clarifying, stabilizing, until others begin to depend on him as the anchor of their decisions. The secret lies in the illusion of indifference. When people sense that your approval is not easily won, they work twice as hard to earn it. When they believe you can walk away without consequence, they cling to the relationship to preserve their sense of worth. Humans attach themselves most tightly not to what welcomes them, but to what withholds itself just enough to feel rare. This is why Machiavelli cautioned against eagerness. Eagerness places you beneath the other. Calm detachment places you above them without ever declaring superiority. And once someone builds their confidence, routine, or identity around your presence, your influence becomes self-sustaining. They adjust their decisions to keep your regard, modify their emotions to avoid your disappointment, and tailor their ambitions to align with your quiet standards. You do not dominate them. They dominate themselves in your direction. The strategist recognizes that dependence disguised as loyalty is the purest leash, for those who rely on you will defend you, even when you remain silent. But perhaps the most irresistible persuasion arises from challenge, not comfort. Humans are creatures of pride, and pride craves tests to prove itself. Tell someone they probably won't grasp the complexity of a situation, and watch how fiercely they focus. Suggest that a task might be too demanding for most, and see how quickly they attempt it. Reverse psychology here becomes an elegant provocation, one that does not insult but ignites. The ego cannot bear the idea of limitation. It seeks to shatter boundaries simply to feel sovereign. A strategist uses this impulse with surgical precision. A gentle remark such as, "You may not want to involve yourself." It takes unusual discipline, plants a seed of defiance that sprouts into action. They move not because you directed them, but because you questioned them. They adopt your idea not because you sold it, but because they refused to appear incapable. And in their effort to contradict your subtle doubt, they align perfectly with your hidden intention. This is the suggestive defiance that governs so many human interactions, the lever that moves even strong minds without pressure. It exploits pride while flattering it, guiding behavior through the irresistible need to rise above expectation. You do not pull, you provoke. You do not demand, you dare. And as they prove themselves, they unknowingly serve the path you designed. In this paradox, their freedom becomes your greatest tool, and their rebellion becomes your silent victory. Behind every method of reverse psychology lies a single governing truth. Pride shapes perception far more ruthlessly than fear or logic. People reject advice not because it is wrong, but because accepting it implies dependency. They resist guidance not because it lacks merit, but because obedience threatens their autonomy. Understanding this, the strategist abandons the crude attempt to impose direction and instead reshapes the environment in which choices appear. It is not force that commands behavior, it is framing. Create a situation where disobedience looks foolish, where defiance appears reckless, where loyalty seems intelligent, and the mind will follow the path that protects its self-image. This is the architecture of influence. You do not battle resistance. You dissolve it by making the desired action feel like the only action that preserves pride. When someone believes they choose freely, obedience becomes a source of dignity rather than submission. Machiavelli saw this centuries before psychology gave it language. Control is not achieved through confrontation, but through the illusion of independence. Once a person feels ownership of a decision, they will guard it with their identity. It becomes their belief, their idea, their cause, yet every step aligns perfectly with your hidden direction. Your influence becomes invisible, woven into the emotional logic they follow without question. This is why the strategist crafts decisions as questions, not commands. Once the mind begins answering, it forgets to resist. But deeper mastery emerges in the creation of false opposition conflict, engineered not to divide, but to direct. To the untrained eye, it appears as disagreement. To the strategist, it is alignment disguised as dispute. By presenting two contrasting paths, both subtly tailored to your aim, you make people believe they rebel, while still advancing your design. They think they contradict you, yet they follow the very current you crafted. This technique exploits the blindness of those who assume opposition equals freedom. In truth, rebellion is the most predictable force in human behavior. Tell a crowd not to look, and every head turns. Suggest that a choice is unpopular, and they race to identify with it. Reverse psychology thrives in this polarity. The more someone attempts to assert independence, the more they reveal the very strings guiding them. The strategist uses resistance as fuel, not friction. Every objection becomes information. Every refusal becomes direction. And as people push against the boundaries you subtly imply, they move in perfect rhythm with your intention. Here lies the paradox. The strongest form of control is not suppressing rebellion, but designing it. The ego cannot detect manipulation when it believes it is fighting. And in the quiet aftermath of their defiance, they stand exactly where you intended, unaware that the battle they won was the one you orchestrated. The ego trap emerges from the same psychological vein, the need to defend the identity one wishes to project. To rule the ego, you do not oppose it, you nourish it. Tell someone they are rational, and they will suppress their emotional impulses to maintain that praise. Tell someone they are perceptive, and they will ignore evidence that contradicts their intuition, simply to protect the image you handed them. complement intelligence, and you inherit its blind spots. This is why Machiavelli warned that loyalty extracted through flattery is the most unbreakable kind. People will voluntarily sacrifice comfort, time, resources, even relationships to preserve the image they believe they earned. The strategist, therefore, offers identity, never orders. A person will betray doctrine for pride, but never betray the version of themselves they cling to. Influence grows strongest, not where you push behavior, but where you shape self-perception. Once someone believes you see greatness in them, they bend their entire worldview to preserve that belief. They begin testing their thoughts, actions, and reactions against the reflection you provided. And the more they align with that reflection, the deeper your influence grows. You are no longer guiding decisions. You are guiding identity, and identity commands every decision that follows. Then comes the law of the void, the deliberate withdrawal that creates emotional hunger so powerful it overrides logic. When you suddenly remove attention, affection, or acknowledgement, the mind panics. It replays every interaction, searching for errors that may have caused the shift. Silence becomes a riddle, absence becomes a wound, and the desire for clarity becomes longing. Humans cannot tolerate emotional emptiness. They rush to fill it, often by offering more of themselves than you ever requested. This is why strategic withdrawal is a weapon more subtle than confrontation. When you vanish at the right moment, others amplify your importance through their imagination. You do not command their focus, they surrender it. The strategist understands that presence builds comfort, but absence builds obsession. It leaves a vacuum that the mind instinctively tries to resolve by gravitating toward you. In this gravitational pull, influence becomes effortless. You do not need to persuade. They persuade themselves. They reinterpret your silence as depth, your detachment as strength, your unpredictability as mastery. And once they begin attributing meaning to your absence, they are already bound by it. This is the quiet dominance Machiavelli favored, not through force, but through the invisible tension that pulls others closer the moment you step back. Unpredictability is another pillar of silent control, for nothing destabilizes the human mind more than the inability to categorize someone. Predictability breeds comfort, and comfort breeds complacency. But when you shift between warmth and distance, generosity and restraint, involvement and withdrawal, people lose their sense of footing. They begin monitoring your every movement, searching for patterns that no longer exist. Their attention becomes tethered to your inconsistency, and in that tether, influence deepens. You are no longer simply present, you become a puzzle they must solve. And the more they attempt to interpret you, the more invested they become in understanding what cannot be fully understood. This is the half-life of truth, the art of blending sincerity with strategy, so seamlessly that even you appear genuine while maneuvering. You show enough authenticity to gain trust, yet withhold enough to maintain mystery. And mystery, in the realm of influence, is a currency more powerful than persuasion. The strategist uses contradiction, not as chaos, but as choreography. A step forward, a pause, a retreat, all calculated to keep others suspended in a cycle of anticipation. In that anticipation, their emotional rhythm falls under your control, syncing itself to the unpredictability you design. They lean toward you for reassurance, unaware that uncertainty was the very tool that bound them. Then comes the weapon of reverse desire, a tactic forged from the paradox that humans want what resists them and undervalue what submits. You never pursue what you truly want. You present it as burdensome, unimportant, or unworthy of urgency. When you appear indifferent toward admiration, others chase your approval to restore their pride. When you seem unbothered by power, they begin offering it to you to affirm their own judgment. If you desire influence, act reluctant to wield it. If you seek attention, behave as though it inconveniences you. The mind instinctively gravitates toward what seems scarce, and scarcity forged from indifference becomes irresistible. This is why Machiavelli warned against visible thirst. Desire exposed is desire diminished, but desire concealed becomes a magnet. When you dismiss what others value, they question their own valuation and seek your perspective. When you resist what they want to give, they offer it with even greater urgency. The strategist moves in this paradox gracefully, letting others elevate him through the very efforts meant to test him. Each act of reluctance becomes a mirror reflecting their longing, their insecurity, their need for validation. And in their attempt to prove themselves worthy, they unknowingly pour power into your hands. Influence at its highest refinement is never taken, it is volunteered. It emerges not through pursuit, but through the subtle, calculated withdrawal that transforms your indifference into a throne others fight to place you upon. Agreement, when used with precision, becomes a blade sharper than opposition. When someone presents a stubborn conviction, the instinctive response is often to argue, but argument strengthens their stance by giving it an enemy to resist. The strategist instead wields excessive agreement, an overabundance of validation so complete that it destabilizes certainty rather than reinforcing it. Tell someone, "You're absolutely right. No question about it," and you hollow out the foundation of their confidence. The ego expects friction, expects challenge, expects something to push against. When none appears, doubt slithers into the silence. They begin questioning themselves because you didn't. Their certainty falters under its own exaggerated weight, collapsing inward like a structure with no tension to support it. This is psychological judo, the redirection of momentum until the mind defeats itself. The strategist does not oppose force with force. He magnifies it until it breaks. And while others defend themselves against hostility, no one ever defends against praise. Praise becomes the perfect disguise, a velvet sheath covering the blade that cuts deepest. In this soft agreement, influence grows without detection. They pull back not because you push them, but because they suddenly feel too far forward. This technique flows seamlessly into the slow withdrawal, the rhythmic cycle of attention given and then taken away without warning. You feed validation in small, measured doses, allowing comfort to bloom, trust to form, dependence to root itself. And just as the mind begins to settle, you retreat. Not aggressively, not permanently. Just enough to create silence where warmth once lived. That silence becomes an echo chamber. Every word you said gains new weight. Every gesture feels symbolic. Every moment becomes a clue. They replay conversations searching for meaning, for mistakes, for signs. Their thoughts orbit you in an attempt to restore the emotional equilibrium your absence disrupted. This is obsession disguised as reflection. People think they chase closure, but they chase reassurance, and reassurance is something only you can grant. In this dance of presence and withdrawal, you become the emotional compass they align themselves to. They adjust their tone, reshape their behavior, soften their doubts, all in pursuit of the warmth you intermittently offer. And the moment they begin modifying themselves without your instruction, you have achieved the purest form of influence. Behavior guided not by your pressure, but by their longing. Reverse psychology here becomes a silent current, carrying them exactly where you intended, while they believe they swim of their own will. Self-mastery is the boundary between strategist and fool, for the manipulator who cannot govern his own impulses becomes enslaved by the very tactics he wields. Many fall into this trap. They adopt psychological techniques to control others, yet become intoxicated by the illusion of superiority. Pride corrodes their discipline, urgency breaks their silence, and emotion exposes their strategy. Machiavelli understood that reverse psychology collapses the moment its wielder seeks validation through it. Influence begins outward, but must end inward. The strategist learns to silence his own need to assert, to correct, to dominate visibly. He does not rush to fill gaps in conversation or to prove his intelligence. He allows stillness to carry him, speaking only when words advance the architecture of his intention. And the less he reacts, the more reactive the world becomes around him. People adjust their tone when he enters, moderate their aggression when he speaks softly, rethink their certainty when he remains calm. His restraint becomes their mirror, their compass, their quiet instructor. This is the point where influence transcends technique and becomes presence. You are no longer manipulating. You are shaping. You are no longer persuading. You are aligning the emotional gravity of the environment. And the silent truth emerges. The more you cease to fight for control, the more control flows toward you effortlessly. This mastery extends into perception, the invisible stage upon which all human behavior performs. Most people react to events. The strategist arranges them. They react to emotion. The strategist channels it. They react to conflict. The strategist shapes the incentives that make conflict irrelevant. Once you perceive the scaffolding behind people's choices: reward, fear, identity, validation, you stop trying to force decisions and start rearranging the invisible levers that support them. You see that people rarely act from freedom. They act from programming. Childhood patterns, past traumas, ego wounds, cultural expectations. These guide them long before logic becomes involved. Understanding this, the strategist stops arguing entirely. Persuasion becomes spatial, not verbal. You tilt the emotional ground so subtly that others lean in the direction you desire without noticing the slope. You adjust incentives until one path feels natural and the others feel burdensome. And once behavior aligns with your invisible design, your presence no longer needs to exert pressure. You become the silent axis of the environment, the reference point to which others unknowingly calibrate their actions. This is influence by gravity, not force constant, unseen, effortless. It is at this level that mastery becomes indistinguishable from destiny, and the world does not feel controlled by you. It feels organized around you. Generosity, when used with subtlety, becomes one of the most deceptive forms of leverage. People rarely suspect manipulation in kindness, for they are conditioned to associate danger with hostility, not benevolence. A favor offered publicly earns admiration, but a favor delivered strategically earns dependence. The strategist gives not to please, but to bind. He offers support that seems casual, assistance that appears effortless, comfort that feels sincere. And yet, behind every gesture lies an invisible thread, an unspoken obligation that compels others to return in ways they cannot articulate. Gratitude becomes loyalty. Loyalty becomes obedience. The recipient cherishes the gift, but forgets the cost hidden beneath it. They assume goodwill where there is design. They defend the giver without realizing why. Machiavelli knew that the sweetest traps are lined not with threats, but with comfort. When you cloak influence in warmth, people walk willingly into your sphere, believing they have found refuge rather than direction. They begin seeking your perspective, your approval, your presence, all under the illusion that they are choosing trust. In truth, they are choosing the comfort you engineered. And once someone associates their emotional stability with your kindness, they cannot distinguish dependence from affection. You do not need to command them. They command themselves in your name. This is why detachment is the crown of influence, the essence of power that moves without effort. The calm man, the quiet strategist, the figure who appears untouched by urgency, becomes a magnet for chaotic minds craving stability. His stillness is not passive. It is declarative. It signals confidence deeper than speech, certainty beyond explanation. Humans sense authority through composure long before they recognize it through words. A single measured breath can silence a room more effectively than a shouted command. A single deliberate pause can reveal insecurities others thought they had concealed. Detachment is not emotional numbness. It is emotional sovereignty. You choose what affects you, when it affects you, and how it manifests. And in that sovereignty, others feel small storms inside themselves and move toward your calm by instinct. They interpret your neutrality as wisdom, your silence as depth, your restraint as power. They project greatness into the void you maintain. And once people begin filling your stillness with their admiration, influence becomes self-perpetuating. They adjust themselves to you, imitate your tone, mirror your posture. They seek your acknowledgement, even when you offer none. This is the level where reverse psychology dissolves into something greater, not manipulation, but gravitational leadership. You no longer move people. They orbit you. Ownership is one of the most potent illusions a strategist can create, for people will defend their creations with a loyalty they would never extend to yours. When you want someone to carry out your plan, you do not present it fully formed. You provide fragments and outline, a hint, a subtle direction, and allow them to complete it with their own ego. Once they add their touch, once they personalize the idea even slightly, it becomes theirs. And a person will guard what they believe they authored with unmatched devotion. This is the gift of autonomy. When people feel ownership, they feel dignity, intelligence, and significance. They stop questioning the origin of the idea and begin perfecting it. They start arguing for it. They begin persuading others on your behalf. The strategist understands that authorship is a greater chain than command. People abandon imposed tasks, but defend self-created convictions to the grave. So you shape the frame, offer the spark, hint at the direction, and allow their pride to build the palace whose blueprint you designed. And once they are invested in their own reflection of your intention, you no longer need to lead. They lead themselves. But influence becomes truly refined when you learn the power of the sea. Reverse flaw the selective confession strategically designed to disarm suspicion. Humans trust those who appear imperfect, yet the secret lies in choosing imperfections that cost nothing but buy everything. Say, I'm not the best with details. I'll rely on your precision, and you elevate them while subtly transferring responsibility. Say, you're better at this than I am, and you plant admiration while guiding them deeper into your design. They rise to the challenge you present, eager to validate the confidence you placed in them. This eagerness makes them susceptible to direction, for people cannot resist the praise of being needed. In truth, your confession is a masked one that shields your strategy while unveiling theirs. They work harder to compensate for your declared weakness, unaware that you are pulling strength from theirs. This humility is not surrender. It is a snare woven from sincerity. You appear modest, underestimated, even vulnerable. And in that underestimation, they lower their guard. When opponents perceive you as harmless, preparation evaporates. When friends see you as dependent, loyalty intensifies. This balance, appearing small while remaining dangerous, is the heart of Machiavellian elegance. The moment they relax, believing they understand you, you gain access to their unguarded selves. Power delivered through surprise carries 10 times the impact of power declared. This is why the strategist practices time dominance rather than constant dominance. He does not reveal strength endlessly, for repetition dulls awe. Instead, he acts rarely but decisively. A single calculated gesture, after long silence, engraves itself into memory. People are startled not because the action is overwhelming, but because they thought you incapable of it. Their assumptions become your camouflage. Their low expectations become your advantage. And when your quiet strength finally appears, it arrives with the weight of inevitability. This is the sacrificial gesture, the deliberate act of yielding credit or allowing another to shine. When you step back, others assume you lack ambition. When you let someone win, they assume you lack power. Yet from behind the curtain, you watch as their triumph binds them to you. Gratitude becomes a leash. Comfort becomes complacency. They no longer view you as a threat, and thus reveal their true strategies openly. And in their relaxed state, you move with precision, unnoticed. Machiavelli understood this paradox deeply. To appear harmless is to become unassailable. Those who announce their strength invite challenge. Those who hide it accumulate influence in the shadows. And then there is burden transfer, the art of shifting responsibility so subtly that others volunteer to justify your vision. When faced with an argument, instead of defending your stance, you question it lightly. You might be right. Perhaps I'm mistaken. The other person, seeking to affirm their intelligence, begins arguing in favor of your view without realizing it. Humans crave being correct more than being wise. They defend ideas not because they believe them, but because defending them feels like power. The strategist exploits this by creating a vacuum where certainty once stood. Your withdrawal compels them to step into the empty space with newfound conviction. And the more passionately they defend your idea, the more ownership they assume over it. This is self-persuasion disguised as debate. Once someone begins articulating your design in their own words, the battle is already won. They will protect the argument they believe they constructed. You do not need to impose belief. You only need to evoke it. In this psychological exchange, they carry your banner proudly, unaware that the very victory they celebrate is the one you engineered. Reverse psychology at its highest refinement is not opposition, but orchestration, the ability to make others move not through force, but through the irresistible gravity of their own ego. Every thread of reverse psychology leads to one final truth. Power does not belong to the one who controls people, but to the one who controls what people believe about themselves. The strategist who reaches this understanding no longer fights for influence, because he realizes influence was never a battle. It was an atmosphere. You shape it not by confrontation, but by calibration. You make pride your instrument, not your enemy. You allow others to wrap themselves in the illusions you quietly provide, illusions of autonomy, of rebellion, of insight, all while their steps follow a choreography they never saw being written. And when done correctly, the world never feels manipulated. It feels self-directed, natural, even empowering. People obey the reality they think they discovered, not the one you constructed. This is the final elegance of Machiavellian mastery. The strategist disappears from the process, while his influence remains in every outcome. At this height of control, technique dissolves into presence. You become the calm that others orbit, the question that lingers in their mind, the silence that shapes their tone, the mirror in which they seek their reflection. You no longer persuade through argument. You persuade through absence. You no longer demand loyalty. People offer it because your stillness represents the stability they cannot find in themselves. And when the world begins adjusting its rhythm to match yours, when voices soften in your presence, when decisions pause for your approval, when conflict bends around your quiet restraint, you have reached the invisible threshold. Authority without performance, influence without appearance, power without effort. The last and most refined law is simple. The ultimate strategist does not tighten his grip. He removes it. For when people believe they are free, they will protect the very structure that guides them. And thus, mastery is achieved not when you dominate the world, but when the world moves in harmony with a design it believes it created. That is the silent crown. That is the Machiavellian endgame. If you're ready to take these strategies beyond theory, check the pinned comment. The link I left there is the next step to becoming truly untouchable.